Hello everybody and welcome back to reaDIYsteaDIY. If it's your first time here, thank you for joining us. Today I'm going to show you how I built my dumbbell rack. It's an all aluminum dumbbell rack, which currently is holding a little over 500 pounds worth of weight. I'm going to go over the materials I used to build it, how I put it together, and some of the problems I had to solve while I was doing that. It's a fair bit to go over, let's get going. I found myself needing a dumbbell rack that could house 8 dumbbells, so 4 pairs. And I had some materials lying around I thought I might be able to use. One of those pieces of material is these 2 really long aluminum beams you see here. There are 2 beams, they are 6.5 feet long each. They are 6 inches tall by 6 inches wide, and the wall thickness is 1/4 inch. They're super heavy, super strong. I had used them previously for a different project. They were built into a bed. It was one of the most solid beds I have ever owned. Still had some holes drilled in it from the flanges I used to put the bed together, and I realized I could use flanges to put this dumbbell rack together, so it was sort of coming together before I even started. As well as the beams, in order to make the legs that would go under them, I used 4 12-inch pieces of 1.5-inch Schedule 40 aluminum pipe. I use Schedule 40 aluminum pipe all the time. We use it in the film and television industry here in Canada quite a lot. We rig lighting off of it, we rig pulleys off of it, we use it to connect cameras to the frames of cars. We use it all the time. It's like a mechano set. You can get a pipe in almost any length, and then you can get fittings that connect those pipes in all sorts of ways. So in this case, the fittings that I used were 8 flanges that were designed to receive 1.5-inch Schedule 40 aluminum pipe. A flange is a kind of pipe fitting that connects a pipe to a flat surface. And then 4 what we call hard 90 scaffold clamps. They're clamps that are designed to connect 2 pieces of pipe together at 90 degrees and not pivot. There are some 3/8-inch bolts holding the flanges into the aluminum beams. And then on the top, there are some pieces of Horsestyle mat that act like cradles for the dumbbells. There's 18 pieces of those, and they're 4.5 inches by 6 inches. Finally, those pieces of Horsestyle mat are held into the aluminum beams with some aluminum screws that have tapered heads. And I also added a washer just to make sure the heads of the screws don't pull through the Horsestyle mat in case something happens. So that's everything I used. Here's how I put it together. So I knew I wanted to use the beams for the top. I was just gonna treat this like a tabletop. I had to attach some flanges to the bottom so I could connect the pipe to use as legs. So as I mentioned, this was previously a bed. I already had the holes in place. If I didn't, what I would do is I would put the flanges on the beams. I would use a Sharpie or something like that to mark where I wanted the holes to go. And then I would drill or tap the appropriate hole into the beam. In this case, they're already there. When I made this into a bed, I chose to tap the holes. So that means the holes have threads. I can put a bolt right into them and they'll screw right into the beam. So now I've got all 4 flanges attached to the bottom of the aluminum beams. It's easy to take the 12-inch pieces of pipe and insert them. I already had these cut. If I didn't, there's a number of ways you can cut aluminum pipe. I have seen people do it with a Sawzall. I have seen people do it with a cutting disc on their angle grinder. I have seen people do it with a hacksaw. A pipe cutter or a chop saw would also be obvious choices. In this case, my preferred method these days is to use my miter saw with a non-ferrous 10-inch blade on it that's designed to cut through aluminum. There are some dangers involved in this. You want to make sure that you're careful of kickback, that your work is clamped, that you're wearing the appropriate PPE, that you've read the manual for the miter saw, that you're using the right blade. There's a lot of things you want to make sure of, to be careful of, so that you don't have a safety issue. You do not want to get hurt by a flying piece of aluminum or a piece of aluminum debris in your eye or dust in your lungs. But this method does work. I prefer to do it outside with the appropriate PPE. If you've never cut aluminum before and you're kind of skittish about it, totally understandable. What I usually suggest to people in that situation is when you buy the pipe, you're gonna buy it at a metal supply place. That metal supply place is gonna have a way of cutting it. They'll just charge you a cutting fee and you can get them to cut all the pieces for you. You gotta know exactly the lengths and all that kind of stuff in advance, but it's a pretty convenient way to not have any danger, not have any mess, and not have to buy any tools. So I insert the 12-inch piece of pipe and then I tighten down the set screw that's on the side. It's a pretty big set screw. That piece of aluminum pipe probably is not going anywhere. So now I've got legs on the dumbbell rack. I need to add some feet because the sharp edges of the pipe would dig into the floor of the gym. So I put another flange on the bottom, and because the flange has holes, if you really want to be safe, you can use those holes to bolt down your dumbbell rack into the floor and it'll be solid. I didn't choose to do that. My dumbbell rack feels pretty good as it is. I'm confident using it without bolts, but bolts would be safer. So now I have 2 halves of a dumbbell rack. They both have legs, they both have feet, but they're not connected to each other. I need to create some kind of cross support to connect the 2 pieces to each other and make it strong. I chose to do this with 4 hard 90 scaffold clamps. We call them hard 90s in the film and television industry. That's because they connect 2 pieces of pipe at 90 degrees, but they don't spin or pivot. I decided to use two 18-inch lengths of pipe for this, which is longer than I needed, but that allowed the pipe to sort of stick out the front and become a storage peg for 2-inch Olympic weights, since I have some of those too. If you've seen my video about how to refurbish some Olympic weights by stripping them down and repainting them, you'll know I have some of those, and they can get pretty messy as well. So while I wasn't confident putting really heavy weights on the front of this, just from a tipping perspective, I knew I could safely put some of the smaller weights onto the storage peg. The hole on an Olympic weight is 2 inches in diameter. The outer diameter of 1.5 inch Schedule 40 aluminum pipe is 1.9 inches. That's because they measure pipe from the inner diameter. That's why they call it 1.5 inch pipe. But the outer diameter is 1.9 inches, basically perfect for a storage peg. So I made sure to extend those out. And then in the end, just so you don't kick it and scrape your shin or something, it's nice to put a little ABS cap on the end, just for the extra safety, and also so the weights don't slide off the front. So now my dumbbell rack was all assembled, but it had an aluminum top, and if you just put dumbbells on top of the aluminum, they're gonna roll off the sides. They could skid forward because, cast iron weights sitting on aluminum, that's kind of a skiddy, rolly kind of situation. So I needed to create some kind of cradle, and I realized that if I cut some pieces of Horsestyle mat, which are very strong pieces of rubber, they're designed for the stalls of horses. You can buy them at tractor supply places anywhere. They're not very expensive, and they're often found on the floors of gyms because they're so hardy. I realized if I cut some Horsestyle mat up into small pieces, I could create a pretty durable cradle for each of the dumbbells. I did a little math and realized that if I cut 18 pieces that were 4.5 inches by 6 inches, that I could screw those into the top of the aluminum beams, and they would go perfectly from edge to edge with 3 inches between each one, and that would create just the perfect cradle for each of the dumbbells, so that when you put them in the gap between the two pieces of rubber, the dumbbells would stay there, they would be suspended over the aluminum, they wouldn't kiss into or scratch or ding up the aluminum, and because it's rubber, they would be much less likely to roll or skid. So this was working out great. I attached them using some aluminum screws, and I added some washers because the heads of the screws, though they were pretty big, weren't big enough to make sure that the Horsestyle mat wouldn't one day inadvertently come torn away and tear through the head of the screw. So I just extended the diameter of the head of the screw with some washers, sunk it down in a little bit, and all the pieces of Horsestyle mat were connected. Because the weights go down between the pieces of Horsestyle mat, they never kiss into the screws, they never knock them, they never hit them, and the weights stay put. So there you have it. I built this dumbbell rack. It holds over 500 pounds currently. It's been up for about a year doing that. It hasn't moved an inch. I am really careful not to put very heavy weight on the front. Like any piece of gym equipment, you put too much weight in one direction and it can get tippy. It's considerably less tippy with a bunch of dumbbells on top of it. If you forget or inadvertently take a bunch of dumbbells off the top to work out with, and you got a bunch of weight on the front, there is a chance that it could tip, so I just don't do that. I only put light weights on the front, and the heaviest of the light weights go right to the back, close to the center of gravity of the dumbbell rack, just to fight against any chance of tipping. So I happen to have these 6.5 foot long aluminum beams lying around, so it was an obvious choice for me to use. So could you use something else on the top? I think so. You would have to experiment with different pieces of wood or metal, whatever you've got access to see how strong it is, and compare that to what you want to put on top of it, and figure it out from there. Manufacturers of something like this would go through a whole testing process. You should do that too. So that's what I did, and so far it's working out great. So I hope that helped you out. If you've got any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. If you've got some workout gear that you've made, I'd love to hear about it. Leave that in the comment section below too. And if there's any way you could like or subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And so until next Saturday, take care, have fun with your DIY projects, and stay safe.